We are in a shifting market in the Lowcountry of South Carolina. So buyers and sellers both need to pay attention to what you need to learn today to be prepared to be successful in today's market. Coming to you with the latest information about what's happening in the Lowcountry real estate market. Chris, we're coming through data through the end of April. We're going to share that data and talk about how this market continues to shift and what buyers and sellers need to be thinking about. So let's look at the data through the end of April. Year to date, we have seen a 12% increase in the number of new listings that have come on the market through the first 4 months of the year. So we're starting to see a buildup of inventory, new opportunities coming to the market. Pending sales are actually down just slightly year to date, about 4% year to date. And April it was down about that same amount as well. Closed sales in April actually dropped a good bit compared to April of 2024, down about 15%. So we're monitoring that, seeing, okay, what's the effect of why maybe there's a little bit less activity in the marketplace than what we maybe saw this time last year. Both average and median sales prices continue to be up. So the market still has confidence in where values are. We're just trying to talk about what's happening trending-wise in terms of activity. And when you put inventory and you put pending sales and closed sales together, you start looking again at that monthly housing supply thing. We're at 4.9%, I think, which we've talked about this before. Anything between a 3 and 6 month supply of inventory, monthly housing supply, puts you right at a balanced market. But the more you go towards the 6, the more you go towards a buyer's market. So let's talk about that a little bit, because what we're seeing is we're starting to increasingly see behind the scenes, on the front line, however you want to think about it, activities, actions, results that are indicative more of going in the direction of a buyer's market. So what do you say? What are buyers and sellers, what are we seeing, or what buyers and sellers need to be thinking about in a shifting market increasingly to be successful in the marketplace?
Well, I think what's important is that this is not scary. This is what happens in markets, especially in real estate markets. They go up and they go down. Yeah. They never stay the same. Mm-hmm. So once you will transition from a strong sellers, eventually to a buyers, eventually back to a seller. It does move. So it's nothing to worry about. We're seeing some amazing deals taking place right now. We're seeing some buyers and sellers both very successful in what they're doing. But what's important in a shifting market is to be prepared for it, to understand it, to know how to navigate through it, to know what to expect, not to just throw a listing out there and then react to how the market responds. I mean, you really have to kind of know what's happening so that you can prepare for success, whether you're a buyer or a seller.
And let me just, before we dig in, maybe we'll start on the buyer side and talk about the seller side, but a lot of what happens is up here. It's mentality. You know, you've got sellers that maybe think, hey, it's still like the COVID market. It's still super strong. I'm expecting to get top dollar, multiple offers, et cetera. And you've got buyers who say, no, it's not like that anymore. It's much more of a buyer's market. So you start ending up getting a little bit of conflict of mentality there, where the expectations aren't necessarily matching. Like during COVID, sellers expected I should sell on the first day for top terms, et cetera. And buyers got conditions saying, boy, if I don't give them top terms, I'm not going to get the house. They were in sync during that. When you're in a shifting market, you kind of end up having some different mentality. So let's talk about sort of what buyers need to be thinking about.
Well, the good news for buyers is the options are increasing. Mm-hmm. So you've got more opportunity, and maybe it's not as much of a fire drill for you. Mm-hmm. Buyers had to respond with a fire drill mentality a few years ago. Now they can take a little bit more time. They can look for what they're after. They've got more selection. Some of the things that they have options to buy now weren't available a couple years ago.
Right.
Or they just missed them.
Right.
But now the marketplace is becoming kind of open in its arms and saying, hey, we've got opportunities in about every little sub-market. So buyers have some choices.
I'm smiling because that's a good thing.
Yes,
that's a scary thing. No, it's increased inventory gives you time and opportunity to have options.
It does.
And maybe some flexibility.
And limited inventory can stall a market as well.
Yeah, for sure.
Just on the flip side of it. But so the buyers have a little bit more of that. The other thing to be considered of is buyers have a little bit more negotiability power. You don't have to necessarily. Now, this is a case-by-case scenario, and I'll go over this a little bit. But for the most part, a buyer can approach a listing, look at it, look at the comps, look at what they're willing to spend, and make an offer, even if it's below list price, which wasn't really happening before.
Right.
We are seeing the negotiability. We're seeing, I think, the sale price to list price ratio has come down to around 97% or something like that right now.
Used to be over 100. Right?
Yeah, so that's something that's really, really important.
Just pause on it really quickly, because on the seller side of that, you might have a seller who's on the market for a good period of time, and they'll tell their listing agent, they say this to us a lot of time, like, well, why don't they just make an offer? Like, it's like buyers need to understand that sometimes sellers are thinking that, like, just bring me an offer. And nothing ridiculous necessarily, but bring me an offer and let's try to work out a deal.
You're so correct. And then, buyers can ask for a little bit more. They can ask for more due diligence. They can spend a little bit more time making sure that they know exactly what they're getting into, so it's not as much of a rush. And it's really an intelligent purchase that comes together. So buyers have a lot of options there. And then from the seller standpoint, this is where I think it's really important for a seller to understand what's happening in the market and be prepared to approach the market correctly.
Right.
Okay. So buyers are interested now in the condition of a property. You're going to see more negotiations take place and things like that. So what can a seller do? Maybe a pre-sale home inspection. Right. Get an inspector through before you come on the market and find out the little things that you might want to address before you hit the market. I think that is really important. The other thing is expect some negotiability. Now, the sooner a listing that's newly put on the market goes under contract or a buyer approaches,
brings an offer.
it's going to probably be closer to list price.
Right.
But the longer something sits, that's when the seller's got to kind of think about it a little bit and know that some negotiability is going to happen to maybe get that buyer to the ratified agreement. A seller shouldn't wait for the market. If the market right now, we're seeing the market shifting from balance towards buyer. So a seller waiting, if the market's not responding now, just sitting there and doing nothing is probably not. It doesn't work out.
We talk to sellers about sort of there being a couple waves of buyers. You go to market, like you said, you might have a situation where you have a buyer that performs on a new listing to market quickly. Normally that's performing with a buyer in that first wave. First wave buyers are typically pent-up demand buyers. They know the area, they know what they're looking for, they've gone through all the other options, nothing's really appealing. They're waiting for the next thing to come on the market. That's a great buyer to have and a great opportunity. But once you pass through that wave, you're on the market, and all of a sudden now you're in the second wave. Second wave is just being on the market. You're just waiting for the next showing, the next inquiry, et cetera. Maybe those people aren't quite as ready, et cetera. And you've got to start evaluating how long do you want to endure the second wave before you want to try to accelerate it closer to something like the first wave might do. And that's usually repositioning like we talked about. So.
Yeah, we have talked about that. One thing a seller that we found success for sellers to do in the negotiation phase is understanding the mentality of a buyer and what to expect after you're under contract. And after the buyer does their inspections and has all of that, what tends to happen? Well, right now, buyers are coming back to sellers and saying, hey, I'd like these items fixed, or I'd like a credit for this. This is not working correctly, so I want a financial credit in order to move forward and get to closing. The seller that understands that during the negotiations can prepare for that during the negotiations and maybe maybe not sell for their bottom line price, but set aside a certain percentage so that if the event comes up where a buyer's asking for something, it's easily solved with a credit or repayment.
I love that idea you've had, is that introducing some allotment, some preparation. Everybody thinks their house is in perfect order and is worth X, Y, or Z, but the reality is that these are resale properties in most instances. And we don't weekly, daily, monthly, annually, or ever have a home inspector come over and say, let me just inspect my house and see how it is. There's going to be surprises that come up. So having a seller be prepared for those surprises and be prepared now in this shifting market to address those things at the price that they were willing to sell the house is super smart, because then they can keep the momentum of the deal going. What we're seeing is this conflict of expectations is we're sometimes seeing a buyer feeling like, gosh, maybe I felt like I paid a little bit more. I was hoping I could negotiate it down to 96% off of list price, but I had to pay 98 or whatever. I'm expecting this house to be perfect. And the reality is it's not going to be. Home inspectors are going to find something every time, multiple things. That's their job. It's a resale property. That's just what real estate is. And the cautionary term to buyers is don't let that be a detriment to your enthusiasm for the property. Go in expecting that there's probably going to be a few things that come up. And that's just the normal course of buying and selling real estate.
Yes, it really is. And I think, buyers and sellers, look at the home inspection as just a tool to kind of better understand the property. But obviously a home inspection, they're going to have close-up photographs on all the problems. So when you get a home inspection report, both sides tend to get a little nervous about that. But one thing that's, I think, important for both buyers and sellers is pay attention to your contract language up front. Mm-hmm. A lot of times a seller will list a property, here comes an offer. The only thing they ask their agent is, okay, what's the price? What are they offering me? And all this energy is on the negotiations of the price. They're not looking at the balance of the content of that contract. Where if that contract content is done in such a way and understood in such a way by both the buyer and seller, you've got a much better percent chance of getting that contract all the way to closing and not having some sort of
that conflict.
Yeah, not having that. That can all be solved with the contract of sale, but you have to be intelligent about what's written on that contract.
Yeah, absolutely. Setting expectations, being realistic about the resale process is so important, because I think that's really where we're seeing a lot of issues is that conflict of expectations, and you introducing this big inspection report, and all of a sudden it makes both sides a little bit upset. Sure. Prepare for it. I love the idea of a pre-sale home inspection. Mm-hmm. There's some other aspects that come with that, but boy, how powerful to have that knowledge up front, and how proactive for a buyer to see, hey, this is pretty cool that the seller took that step, et cetera. So we're starting to see that mentality more and more.
Yes, but again, this is something we expect. Is something healthy markets do. They change. That's what That's what's happening now. Have we had a strong year so far?
Oh yeah.
We're selling a ton of real estate, so the market is hopping.
Yeah.
But just understanding where that strike zone is and where the activity is really important.
Let me say that it always felt like I know we talk about the COVID market, it was just so extraordinarily a seller's market. It was so steeply tit for the benefit of sellers that it wasn't really that enjoyable for buyers. Great opportunity to buy during that. But I think anybody in reason would say, boy, isn't it nice to have kind of a balanced market? A little bit more inventory, a little bit less pressure, a little bit of opportunity for both buyers and sellers. Prices are still rising. That's a nice, welcoming environment. Just like we talked about in our market report for the start of the year. The welcome mat is out. Yeah. We just want to make sure that people have expectations about what the journey should look like, so we don't have conflicts from contract to
Sure. And the last thing I want to add is we're talking global. We're talking the macro markets, right? We're talking what's happening overall. Individual markets are behaving differently. Sure. Spoken to it before, the pixelization of the marketplace. Mm-hmm. So it's really important to understand how your particular market is behaving, because your market might be behaving differently from somebody over here.
Correct. So that's neighborhood to neighborhood.
It really is right now.
Area to area, island to mainland. Yeah. You really got to study that on the buyer side and the seller side.
So much.
And pay attention so that you can understand how to read that particular market and have good, successful results. Okay, awesome. All right, guys. Thanks as always for paying attention to what we have to say, and we'll talk to you guys soon.